It's wonderful to have a chance to preach here this morning. If we haven't met, my name is Mike Jordan. I teach up at the college. Have been at our church for, it was nice to hear Emily say, our own Mike Jordan. So we've been here long enough. I guess I'm one of our own. So we have been, I guess, members of this church for 16 and a half years at this point, and very, very thankful for all this church has been for us. When Pastor Randy arrived, I mentioned to him that because I am a preacher but don't work on Sundays, that I can be grabbed at a moment's notice if he needed me. And he did something very pastoral, which good leaders should do this morning, when he texted me and said, "I need your help," which is not everything, not all pastors would do that. But that really shows me a very strong leader who's able to say, "I need your help." And so I was really glad to be able to come and do that. It was Pastor Paul Shea who told me in these very walls, pastors should be ready to preach, pray, or die at a moment's notice. And I'm one of those who's very thankful it was preaching I was asked to do, but I know there are some of you who would actually prefer to be asked to die at a moment's notice than to preach or to pray. So I'm very thankful, though, that I got this call this morning. I actually want to talk with you a little bit about that this morning, about the way that all of our lives are not as long as we think they are. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. I promise I will keep it as hopeful as I can, okay? My family, and some of you have known me when I was a young boy, so my grandparents taught at Houghton, and we would often come visit at Easter time. And my family took Good Friday very seriously. And even when we weren't in Houghton, my father would not work on Good Friday. He would close his office, and that was not always common, and increasingly is less common, where Good Friday seems kind of like an ordinary day of doing business now. But I grew up taking it very seriously, and frequently when we were in Houghton, we would attend the Tenebrae service here, and then I would go home and I would watch the 1977 TV miniseries, Jesus of Nazareth. Some of you may have seen Jesus of Nazareth. It used to show at Easter time. And I remember being very concerned as a young boy because it looked to me like Jesus was being crucified. Hollywood has its way of depicting things, and to me it looked like someone was actually being crucified, and I went and told my parents this was on TV, and they assured me that it wasn't real. I knew better, of course, because I could see it with my own eyes. It's what it felt like to me. I remember being very moved by Jesus' suffering. And perhaps you have something like that in your life where you've seen some sort of dramatic presentation of Jesus' suffering, The Passion of the Christ. Perhaps that was that movie for you. The suffering of Jesus has inspired a lot of art, both good art and kitschy art, I suppose, but it's motivating for people. It's one of the things that sort of inspires artists to make their work. What I want to ask this morning is something which might seem a little provocative, and I hope you'll hear me charitably. Because Jesus' suffering is so moving, the question for me is always, is the uniqueness of Jesus' suffering the point? Did Jesus suffer more than anyone else who's ever lived? If I brought to you someone who I think I could demonstrate had suffered more than Jesus, would you feel the need to defend Jesus' honor and say, no, this person thinks they suffered, but Jesus really suffered? Now, before you answer that question, keep in mind that I think in this room, most of us have not suffered severely. We haven't suffered or at least most of us in this room have not suffered, as Hebrews 12 says, to the point of shedding our blood. So presumably the author of Hebrews meant basically, if you're reading this, you're still alive and you haven't really suffered as a martyr has. And I feel that way sometimes, like when I feel like I'm living out the book of Job, like we all feel that way sometimes, right? Like, why me? Like, why is this going so poorly for me? I am reminded that I have lived a very easy life with a very little suffering. Like I've never lived through war. No one has ever wanted to cut off my head. Maybe after the sermon you can come and talk to me. But like most of the time, right, I haven't really suffered. So it's easy for me to say, well, Jesus suffered the most because he sure suffered a lot more than me. But I don't know if I'd want to go to some part of the world where they're lacking basic infrastructure, where there's poverty, where it's war-torn. And I don't know if I'd want to lecture that person and say, you think you have it bad, but Jesus, let me tell you about Jesus. He really had it bad. I don't know. I don't know that that's the point. I don't know if Jesus' suffering was demonstrably the worst. But what I do know, I think I know anyway, is that Jesus' suffering, the uniqueness is only part of the point. The other part of the point is that Jesus' suffering was ordinary. It's not just that it was the worst suffering of all time, right? But that a God who doesn't have to experience suffering, a God who could opt out of suffering, opted in and said, I want to go and be with them and suffer with them. A God who could live and never taste death enters into the world where his death is assured by human cruelty. Like a God who could have just sort of sat around and watched us all build weapons and kill each other, chose to step into a world where some of those people and some of those weapons were used to kill him. That God stepped into the primal realities of hate, pain, and rejection. Kids, don't listen. Parents, listen. That feeling you have when your kids say to you, I hate you. God knows that feeling. Like God experiences that. Puts himself in relationship with us, his children, who occasionally say that to him in word or deed. And so somehow divine suffering and human suffering are connected. Jesus went through what we go through, and so what we go through means something. It means that God knows where we are. It means that human suffering has buried within it the seeds of redemption somehow. Like when you suffer, when you're passed over, when you're ignored, when you feel completely invisible, the message of the cross is not, get over it, someone had it worse. The message of the cross is, I see you. I get it. I know you. I'm with you. That's a God who steps into suffering with us. Now, in Colossians here, Paul takes this one step further. Not only does God know our suffering, but Paul says something completely mind-blowing in Colossians 1:24. From the NRSV, which is not what Jill read this morning, I am now rejoicing in my sufferings for your sake, and in my flesh I am completing what is lacking in Christ's afflictions for the sake of his body, the church. That's a confusing passage. Let's linger with that. It seems a little arrogant for Paul to say that, right? I am completing what is lacking in Christ's affliction. And if not arrogant, at least a little imprecise. Now let's be fair. Paul never had the chance to sit through Mr. Blue's catechism class. Right? And so he doesn't know, maybe, that the cross is sufficient. Right? He doesn't know that the cross covers over all human sin for all who believe. Maybe Paul thinks like, oh, there's something I have to do to help out, because he never again had Mr. Blue tell him that's the case. Maybe, though, Paul is not making that point. Maybe Paul is saying something different. I think what Paul is saying is not that the cross is lacking in the sense of it's not good enough or it didn't accomplish enough. I don't think what Paul is saying is that Jesus tried his best with the cross, but it wasn't complete till I came along to finish up what was lacking in his work. I think what he means is that there are places that the cross has not yet touched in the flesh until Paul carried his own cross there. Parent time, again. I felt such a sense of pride a year and a half ago when my daughter Grace was chosen to give a sermon. Now, those of you who are at Houghton know this. So at the end of the school year, after the college students have all left, one senior student is chosen to give a sermon kind of on Youth Sunday. And so Grace was chosen to give a sermon, and it was great. Wasn't it, guys? It was great. I mean, you remember it as well as I do. You have a picture on your phone like I do, I'm sure, right? Like, you remember how good it was, right? And when she was preaching, I was like, oh, she's my kid. right? Like, like not only she told great jokes, right? I mean, I said to her, Grace, do you want help? She's like, no, I'll handle it. And I was like, okay. And then she handled it, she did great. She told good jokes. There was like an underlying organization to the sermon that I was like, she watched a preacher and she got it, and there was a way that you could just tell, like she took a scripture out and held it to the light like her dad does and says, yeah, I see that. And she shared it with you. And I thought, wow, she's like me, except, not quite as good. But then, I thought about it and I was like, what if she's better? Yeah. Well, whether or not she's better or worse, right? She's different. And she is taking that little piece that she learned from me, and she's taking it with her wherever she goes, to places I can't go. So right now she's back at Gordon, a place I cannot go, right? And she's in a women's dorm where I certainly cannot go. And she's probably having a theological conversation, and she's carrying that with her, right? She's taking this little piece out into the world. Something that's of me is in a different place now because of her. And I think that's what Paul means here, right? The cross is all sufficient to save, certainly, but the cross had never made it to a prison in Rome in just that way until Paul took it there. Like, there may have been other Christians there besides Paul, but what I'm saying is, like, Paul is living out and Paul is exemplifying the gospel in a way that is making it in the flesh, incarnate, here and now. I am exemplifying Jesus' suffering in a way that is true to who Jesus really is, so that when people look at me, it's like they're looking at Jesus, because I'm suffering like him. I'm carrying the cross like him. I'm dying like him. Happier verse, a few verses down. Christ in you, the hope of glory. I hear that passage a lot. I use that passage a lot. I love it. The idea that Christ is living in me. Like when I'm out there doing my thing, right? Like when I'm teaching my class, when I'm counseling a student, when I'm running on the track and bearing witness to what it looks like when a 47-year-old hauls his body around the track. Like when I do that, right? Christ is in me. When I'm doing everything I do, right? I want to be showing Jesus to everyone. But in the context of this passage, Paul is talking about that kind of idea, but like with a darker shade. Rather than Christ just being seen in me in all the things I do when I'm gifted to do them, Christ is also seen when I cannot choose what to do, when I am suffering, when sufferings bring the reality of the cross into whatever situation I find myself. Christ can still be seen. Yes, Christ is seen when you exert your will on the world in a godly way. Like for me, Christ is seen when I write books. Christ is seen when I get an invite to preach in a local church. Christ is seen when I parent, ideally. Sorry, guys. Christ is seen when I lecture in my classroom. Christ is seen when I do a wedding. Christ is seen if I win an award and people speak well of me. But here's the good news, right? Christ is not only seen when you exert your will on the world, but when you faithfully bear the evil will of other people. Like I talked to you this morning about the idea of Jesus suffering and his passion. And that idea of passion is always a little weird, because like when we're talking about what's your calling in life, should you do, we say, what's your passion? And we mean, what do you really love to do? And we think that's weird that you call this the passion of the Christ. And you talk about passion, is it like, did Jesus love to do this? But the connector is that both of these ideas have their root in the word passive. Think of it this way, right? If you didn't have to be here right now, where would you be? Some of you have to be here because parents or others dragged you here. Some of you are here because the Spirit dragged you here, right? So whoever it is that dragged you here, if you didn't have to be here, where would you be? What would you be doing? I know for me, I'd probably be consuming content about sports, right? The Eagles are dead to me. The Bills are dead to you, I'm sure, right? So we move on to the next thing. You all can move on to the Sabres. There's a time when I start to think about the Sixers and the Flyers and the hope of the Phillies to come. And so if I were not doing this right now, if I didn't have to be here, I'd be thinking about those things. Where would my mind be going when it is passive? to my passions, the things that I gravitate towards when I'm not otherwise occupied. The things you daydream about are probably related to your passions, for good or for ill, right? Like the things we gravitate towards thinking about when no one else knows and when you are not even really controlling what you think. These are the things that we are passionate about. And so Jesus' passion is a lot more like this than you think. Throughout Jesus' life, 3 years, he is doing. Active. He's healing, he's teaching, he's raising up leaders. Every so often he stops to pray, and it's so notable that they're like, Jesus had to go away and pray for a while. Like, we had to put that in because most of his life was characterized by activity during these times. And then there's one moment, my Biblit students know it because I drill it home. There is a moment in the Synoptic Gospels when we read Jesus was handed over. That's the language. And as soon as Jesus is handed over, and incidentally, that's not really a word we use for people very much, right? We don't say, hand me that person, right? Unless they're a baby, right? But when Jesus is handed over, instantly, we go from Jesus active to Jesus passive. So people say to him, are you a king or not? He doesn't say anything. Or if he does, he says something cryptic like, well, that's what you say. Right? But he's out of the game of trying to control the narrative anymore. Right? He is now letting things happen to him. And what I'm trying to get you to see this morning is that, yes, God is seen clearly as Jesus' son when he is doing. All these things he's doing. But God is just as clearly seen in him when others are doing to him. Jesus shows us the heart of the Father in all that he says and he does. But we also hear the heart of the Father in the ping of the nails on his hands. God is seen in Jesus when he is active and doing, and when other people are doing to him. And you know what? Neither part of Jesus' life makes sense without the other. Picture a life where Jesus did a lot of good things, but didn't die to effect salvation. It's not his life. And think of a world where Jesus came in the world, and like we say sometimes, he was born to die. Imagine a world where he died as a 3-year-old to affect the planet. That doesn't make sense either. His life and his suffering go together. And so for you, we tend to think in our lives, Christ in me, the hope of glory, that's when I'm out there doing for Jesus. Like when I reach out with a cup of cold water, when I care for the least of these, when I preach a sermon, like this is when Christ is seen in me. But just like Jesus' life is not complete without his passion, neither is your life. God is also seen in you by what you do when you can't control the action, when you are living out your passion. So Christ is seen when you're faithful if other people are mistreating you. Christ is seen when you tell the truth even when a lie would get you ahead. Christ is seen when you keep shining even though others tell a lie about you. Christ is seen when the world turns you upside down or inside out, but you maintain your integrity. Christ is seen when you choose not to succumb to despair, when you just want to crawl into the fetal position and sleep for weeks. Christ is seen when the jobs are anonymous and unseen, but they bless the world in a way beyond knowing. Christ is seen when you exemplify the fruit of the gospel in a world that still desperately yearns for it, but doesn't really have a language for it anymore, and acts like what we really want is a strong man. We really want power. But Christ is seen when you wrestle all night, but will not let go until he blesses you. That's good news. It doesn't sound like good news, but it is. You know why? Because all that stuff's going to happen to you anyway. Like others are going to mistreat you. Others are going to ignore you. Others are going to flip you off and kick you out. Others are going to reject you. You may as well have the joy of knowing that your faithfulness in the middle of that means something. Others, other people, not you of course, but other people are going to be horrible sometimes. Never me, never you, but other people. Right? That's the very basic reality of human existence. But here's the good news. You being faithful in the middle of that means that you are going to have a front row seat to what the cross can do. because the cross is going to leap off the pages of your Bible, and it's going to leap into your living room and your church and your workplace and your family. We talk about bearing the cross all the time. This is what it means. Right? This is why we bear the cross. We don't bear it so we can pat ourselves on the back and say, I've done enough now, and Jesus has to receive me into his kingdom because I've given so much away. No, we bear the cross so that the cross goes to every corner of the world. So people can see the good news that the world of suffering that we experience alone, that God has stepped into it with us. When I was a student at Houghton, I was a linguistics minor. Classes were taught by John Stark, who was with Wycliffe. We have lots of Bible translators who are connected with our church. One of the phrases that Bible translators will use is the idea of hearing the Bible in our heart language, that everyone deserves to hear the Bible in the words that kind of resonate with their heart and their personal experience. So when a person translates the Bible into a new language, it's something that people can hear and resonate with because they feel at home. In the same way, when we carry the cross into new territory, we allow someone to hear the cross and see the cross in their own heart language, in a situation that's like theirs. People are suffering all around us and feeling very, very alone. And we know they're not alone. And so we could say, well, 2,000 years ago, there was a man who died on a wooden cross. I know we don't use crosses anymore. And oh, by the way, he didn't stay dead, he rose up. And this is an important part of what we say. But we also show them what the cross life looks like in our own, so that they can see and understand. So maybe right now you're carrying your cross. Maybe some of you are struggling through the valley of the shadow of death because a loved one has died or is dying. Don't give up hope. When you grieve well, and that doesn't mean slapping a smile on your face, but when you grieve well, you show other people who are walking through the valley that it can be walked through and that you're not alone. Maybe you, like me, maybe you're struggling with, how do I live out the gospel in a world that is absolutely on fire? How do I do this? And every time I do it, people get angry and yell at me. What do I do? How do I do that? Sometimes when we want to do this, we just want to check out and say, I'm not going to do it anymore. Like Jeremiah. I'm going to shut it up in my bones and keep it in. If that's you, don't quit. Don't check out. To check out is death. And guys, you're going to die anyway. You may as well die on a cross. When you bear your cross by telling the truth in a world that loves lies, you bring hope by showing people that the truth can still be told. The world does not believe the truth can still be told. We can tell it, but it will mean going to our cross. Bearing our cross means that our suffering can be redemptive instead of meaningless. Your sufferings, when you suffer well, bring Jesus' suffering to light for people who never quite saw him that way before. Last thing to say, and then I'll take my seat. Often, it's not a mistake when we talk about our passions and our calling. What is that thing that God has made me to do? What's my task now? What's my vocation? Our cross and our calling are connected. Just like for Jesus, his passion was the logical outcome of a life lived that way. When you burn that brightly for God, someone's going to see that light and say, we have got to snuff it out, right? It's not like Jesus was sort of living his life and then the cross was some kind of random interruption. No, the cross absolutely interprets everything that's come before and say, oh, now it makes sense. And in the same way, right, Jesus' suffering only makes sense when you see the way he's lived his life. Like, all these things are connected with each other. Your cross and your calling are connected too. When you're thinking, what has God made me to do? What should I be living for? The question of what am I willing to die for is right there, isn't it? Every day, even today, we talk about that idea of, I just have one hill to die on, right? And you also have one hill to die on, and your hill and my hill are different hills. That's okay. So much of that is related to the person that God's made you to be. The people that God made you to care for, those are the people you would die for. The things God made you to do, those are the things that you would die to see done. Sometimes we run away from the things that cause us pain. I get it. We don't want to hurt. Who wants to hurt? Right? But while the world is turning us inside out and upside down, we just want to spend our time plotting revenge. We just want to ruminate how we can get out of the doghouse and back to our lives. But our pain has something to teach us. When we bear our cross, when we know our cross, we understand our lives. We understand what's worth doing and what's not worth doing. You and I are going to die, some of us sooner than others. Here's the weird thing about being 47. Like, some of you just think, he is a boy. And others of you are like, this man has 1 foot in the grave. Is he going to be okay? Like, both of those are true, right? And compared with the scale of eternity, like, every one of us here has just a little time. Right? Living for Jesus through earth's little while. Yeah. Bearing our cross sobers us and makes us say, what's the hill I'm going to die on? Because once you know the hill you're going to die on, you have a lot more clarity about the road you need to take to get there. And when you know that, suddenly the big problems in the world, they come into some sharper focus. So for me, I know, for example, talking about tariffs and economic issues, not my hill to die on. Talking about racism and how we view other people, that's part of my hill to die on. When I have to look and think, how am I supposed to address this big flaming world? I don't think about it only in overwhelming terms anymore. I just think to myself, where do I have to bear this cross right now? And I'm content to let other people bear their crosses somewhere else. I'll do what I can, not what I can't. Just like Christians always have throughout history, and I'm going to leave this in the hands of a God who's bigger than me. Often I will drive by or walk through a military seminary where you just see, cemetery where, pastors should not confuse seminary and cemetery. Just drive through a military cemetery, walk by, and you see the crosses just row on row, right? Row on row. And yes, of course, there's one cross that's sufficient, but there sure is something that's very clear when you see lots of crosses lined up together. You know that it's a sacrifice of a large group of people who have all given themselves to something larger than themselves. And each of them has given all that they could for one little piece. Many of them literally died on hills. Yeah. And so for us, we imagine the Christian life in the same way. While we're here, we live for Jesus through earth's little while. And when we suffer, and when we bear our cross, we trust too that there's something that's meant when the world sees all of us together, giving our lives away to follow the one who we know will raise us up. Let me pray with you. God, we are so deeply thankful that the suffering we all experience is not meaningless. It's not random. We're not alone. We can give our lives away and carry our cross, confident that as we follow you, that others will see you in us. So just like we can serve you with our strength, we also can serve you with our weakness. And we serve you with our joy, we can also serve you with our suffering. Be honored in our living and in our dying. We ask this through Christ and by the power of his Spirit. Amen.